Hello and welcome everyone attending the first Reform Mormon General Conference. My name is Istvan and I would like to thank everyone for the opportunity that I can speak here today. I am not an expert in the field of the topics I would like to talk about today, so I would say the main goal of my talk is to facilitate meaningful discussion and hopefully bring us all a little bit closer together. My topic is the possible role of non-theists, like myself, in the community of Reformed Mormons, but I hope my points are applicable in general to any type of community that is open to a wide range of beliefs or non-beliefs within their ranks. I would like to talk a little bit about myself. I live in Canada, but I was born and raised in Hungary, a country in Central Europe. Unlike many of the people interested in Reform Mormonism, I did not grow up Mormon. In fact, I did not grow up religious at all. My dad was a staunch atheist, and my mom is more of a mildly spiritual person. In my teenage years, I got caught in the frantic search for my identity. As a result of that, instead of experimenting with other substances, I experimented a bit with Catholicism, Islam, and then I bumped into the Mormons in my hometown and I ended up joining them. My disillusionment with institutional Brighamite Mormonism, the only kind that truly exists or has a footprint in Hungary, led me to leave a few years later, but my fascination with any and all things Mormon never left me, even as I finally reconciled with being an agnostic atheist. So, what am I doing here, you may ask? I asked myself the same question many times. Some people I know who are interested in a kind of Mormonism that works for them are people with Mormon ancestry themselves, going back many generations. People who feel like they are a part of Mormonism and its wider cultural context, regardless of their theological beliefs or ecclesiastical affiliation. I am not such a person. I converted to LDS at age 17, and my family tree is overwhelmingly Catholic. Then there are people who enjoy some of the ritual aspects of Mormonism. Perhaps they like initiatory or endowment ceremonies, and they would like to keep practicing those on their own terms. I confess that I am not really one of those people either, although there are ritualistic practices that I do see as potentially very useful. So, what is it that draws someone like me to this initiative? The first element of that comes from my mindset expanding even after my journey back to atheism. As many new atheists, and also as many people who leave a religious organization that eventually did not work out for them, I did think of religion for a while, especially theistic religion, as a universally harmful phenomenon. Eventually, exploring the ideas of people like John Hamer, a pastor of Community of Christ, or Dan McClellan, a religious scholar and a member of the mainstream Brighamite LDS Church, changed my views about this fundamentally. As difficult as it was to deconstruct my previous literalistic black and white religious views, it was perhaps even harder to deconstruct the idea that equates religion in general with those literalistic all or nothing type worldviews. Thus, I came to see religion, or at least the belief in the supernatural and the quest to find a higher meaning in life, as something that is most likely an inherent characteristic of human beings, one of many such characteristics. Seeing religion in this light made me realize that letting these innate human needs go completely unexplored may, in some cases, be almost as unhealthy as letting them run completely amok, regardless of consequences. So, my old atheism, almost like an abstinent prohibitionist view, thinking that belief in a god or gods is poisonous at any concentration, evolved into an atheism that accepts that as much as religion had caused endless destruction and pain in the world, maybe the solution is trying to practice it together in a safer way, as opposed to the impossible task of extinguishing it. But how does this make me relate to Reform Mormonism specifically? As I mentioned before, I was a bit of a truth seeker in my teenage years, which made me relate very deeply to Joseph Smith when I first heard his story. Now, I do not believe he literally communed with gods or angels. I do believe that he, as a young boy, felt suffocated by the religious environment around him when he was growing up, and he needed an outlet for that. He was probably tired of hearing from preachers, you can't believe it this way, you can't do it that way. He needed to do religion on his own terms. Now, while deconstructing my previous beliefs, I also came to realize that after becoming the leading figure of this community, Joseph did abuse his power in many ways that are absolutely unexcusable. Still, I find that I can relate to the person young Joseph was, and as someone who rejects dogmatism entirely, I believe that exploring religion on our own terms, like he and his fellow early Mormons did, can be a healthy exercise as long as it is done responsibly. Something that Dan McClellan said once, and I am paraphrasing this, is that humanity never really drew absolute morality from religion. We always use their common moral framework to shape religion to our image, and then we just kind of pretended that we did it the other way. My question is this: why would we not do this in an honest way instead, and form communities with people that share commonalities with our moral framework, even or especially if we see religion itself in 1,000 different ways? Another idea that piqued my interest that I believe first came to me upon watching an interview with Evan Charley and Rob Lauer was the idea of restoring the restoration. The rapid growth of Mormonism in Joseph Smith's time proves that there was a subset of people in the area where it all started who were not satisfied by the mainstream Christianity of the time anymore, and they were drawn to something experimental that claimed to restore some of the original ideas from the Bible that were not practiced in mainstream Christianity anymore. These movements were called restorationists, and as we know, Mormonism was one of the most successful ones out of them. Obviously, as it often happens, eventually, some unfortunate human hierarchies took over, like they previously did with many other religious movements, and parts of Mormonism calcified themselves into the dogmatic systems that they were trying to get away from. But I started wondering, what did Mormonism get right about this so-called restoration, and what did they get wrong? Also, in a similar way, since there are people attached to Mormonism in some way, but also not satisfied by its mainstream manifestations, could the restoration itself be restored, as in trying to trace back to the good ideas Mormonism started off with, and then just kind of go from there? In my view, there were many good things in the early parts of Mormonism. There was a very communitarian aspect of it, the theory of which I believe to be worth exploring, regardless of how it was eventually abandoned by most Mormon denominations. There was a diversity of voices trying to innovate and bring fresh ideas to the table. Of course, with Joseph focusing on the hierarchical nature of the church and putting himself in the center, many of these opposing voices were unfortunately silenced. But what could have been if they were not? There are some later ideas of Mormonism that I also find interesting. Although I do not believe in the literal progression of humans into gods or divine beings, I have always felt like the idea that once we just fulfilled our obligations, we're done. It just did not work for me on the long term. I do believe in a kind of eternal progression that concerns every human being to ever live, to leave their mark on the continuum of humanity's existence, from ancient times to a hopeful far future. I believe there can be a benefit in trying to synthesize these ideas with each other in our mission to redefine what divinity even means to us. This brings me to the last thing I would like to discuss, the seeming absurdity of an atheist trying to define what divinity is. Although it may look strange at first, I do not believe that coming from a non-theistic point of view is impossible to reconcile with concepts of the divine. On the contrary, I believe that humanity has already explored in great depth and breadth the theistic ideas of the divine, and in my opinion, it is high time to start offering alternative perspectives on this. Most importantly, I think non-theists as members of open religious movements can help balance out some of the harmful magical thinking that often plagues new movements and encourage healthy discussion and disagreement. In my opinion, demystifying the divine can actually help with understanding it even more, because removing the magical elements tends to help explain it more on the basis of the human condition and human behavior. Although I believe that being non-theist or atheist does not mean a person dedicated to fight against anything and everything religious, But I also know that atheists have been on the forefront of fighting against the harmful aspects of religion, and I believe that the type of uncompromising view that sets the alleviation of human suffering before any divine goals does have a place in the open religious movements that seek similar goals. I do believe that non-theists engaging in healthy discussion with theists, deists, pantheists, and so on can provide counterpoints and balances that are not always present in a group that only has different flavors of theists. Starting from a point of view that does not already have a preset axiom about God's existence and God's attributes can actually lead to newer understandings of what divinity even means, or how the divine can be meaningful to people, or how it relates to a simple innate morality if we accept that humans are inherently good, and create sacred things that are not merely dependent on the reinterpretations of previous religious dogmas. Regardless of our type of individual belief systems, we are all parts of communities and systems that experience common outcomes. Therefore, if there are people with different belief systems who are seeking same or similar outcomes, it is actually quite valuable for these people to support each other as part of the same community and to define what sacredness or divinity could mean to them together. For example, as a queer person, the experiences, feelings, and the needs of all of my queer siblings are sacred to me, not tolerated, not reluctantly accepted, but sacred. Finally, I am reminded of a story that is circulating on the internet in different forms, but it originally comes from the Hasidic rabbi Moshe Leib, discussing why God created atheists. Obviously, the rabbi was a theist, and his position was that even for believers, it is better if they act towards their fellow humans as if there was no God at all, and the only people able to help their fellow humans were themselves. In a similar way, I interpret the story of the death of Jesus from a non-theistic point of view. To me, nothing could be a more beautiful interpretation of the Jesus message than the one that says, "Do not look for me to save the world single-handedly. I was crucified, I died, and I left my Holy Spirit to guide you. Now you have to look within yourselves to find me," meaning that now you have to take on the mantle of saving the world by listening to your inherent human morality, forming safe communities, and going forth with love and compassion. Thank you.